So when I was 8 years old, I started an international spy company organization with my best friend and next door neighbor, Kelly. It was called YPS, which is spy spelled backwards. So we wanted to be clandestine enough that we wouldn't be interfered with, but also if you were going to contract a spy agency, you would need to know that it was in fact a spy agency. So our thinking was they would be smart enough to figure that out, so we were in the clear. So YPS it was. The reason for this agency was there was this really strange man on our street. He lived alone and he was childless, which made him completely foreign to us because everyone else on our street had kids and was married in this very traditional nuclear family of the 1980s. As a 42-year-old woman who lives alone and is happily childless, I think perhaps maybe I misjudged her. It was just a little too harsh at first. Because now I'm like, oh, that poor man. He's just trying to live his best life. And then Kelly and I came along. To be fair though, he was a little weird. He had one of those little car decal stickers, the baby on board ones, but his said, "I'm naked from the waist down," which makes me feel just a little bit better about what we did to him. He was just a very bizarre man. We didn't know his name, so we had to come up with a code name for him. So we called him RB6. And it's because the one time we got a really good visual of him, he had a red mark on his forehead, we thought maybe a birthmark, so we called him, the RB was for red blotch, or also robot. We weren't sure he was carbon-based, we weren't 100%, but we thought perhaps that's where his control panel was. And then he did have, so while he lived alone, there were 3 women we clocked going in and out of his home. And again, just living his best life, right? But we're like, dude, that's a polygamist. That's the immediate conclusion we drew at 8 years old. I didn't know the word polygamist, but I was like, he's got 3 wives, and that's illegal. So RB3 doesn't roll off the tongue. And also, it's a little on the nose, right? So we multiplied that by 2 again, for cleverness' sake, and then it became RB6. We were like, this way we can talk about it, but no one will know who we're talking about. But we talked about him so much that literally everyone knew who he was and knew that was RB6. Our parents were like, okay, we'll just leave RB6 alone. They would use this terminology with us. The real big thing happened though when we saw July of 1989. We saw on the side of his house there was a dead Christmas tree sitting there. In Oregon, where I grew up, everyone has a live Christmas tree. There's no fake Christmas trees in the 80s in Oregon. That's just not a thing. Sustainability, pshaw. And the Boy Scouts that was how they fundraised. They would come and collect your Christmas tree, you'd leave a check with a little form attached to your Christmas tree on the pickup day, and they would take it away and mulch it. So when we saw this dead Christmas tree on the side of our house, we're like, okay, there's our smoking gun. He obviously murdered these Boy Scouts when they came. That's what happened. We started spreading this rumor to the other children in our neighborhood, and we wanted them to have a healthy fear of RB6 because we didn't want them to be next. Our friend Steven lived next to RB6 and was a little bit higher up on the hill, so from his backyard we could see into RB6's backyard. And there we saw, again, so I'm sure this guy was a nice guy, but strange. He had these 2-dimensional wooden cutouts that were staked into the ground, and there were woodland animals painted on them. And we were like, grave markers. Grave markers of the children that he murdered. This is awful. So we knew, and I still to this day can't tell you how at 8 years old we had the wherewithal to be we don't actually have enough information to go to the police. A confession would be better. But that's what we thought. So we started to try to get him to confess. So we would leave little notes for him. And they said things like, we know what you've done. And turn yourself in now before we call the police. And we would fold them up and we would place them around his yard, at his front door. We committed a federal crime straight in the mailbox. to write down what we wrote on the note, where we put it, and we would check back to see if they had been found, right? Because we wanted to know, is our message getting through? Sometimes when he wouldn't find them, we would just like straight up doorbell ditch and like leave it there and run away. And I have a really hard time figuring out how I would react if I opened up a piece of paper and then a child's handwriting. Just terrible. I mean, at one point too, he came out of his house. I remember that we were all playing in the street. It was in the 80s. He came out of his house and all the kids looked at him, screamed. And he's just like, going. It only took about 2.5 years before he put his house up for sale. By that time, like Kelly and I had started to grow up. You know, I was maybe 11 when the house went on the market. And, I mean, really, we had cooled down with the RV6 stuff after a while. We started to lose interest. Obviously, he wasn't going to confess. We kept eyes on him, tagged a little bit. And yeah, we just kind of like let it go. And Kelly and I were also getting older. We were hitting puberty. You know, by around 10, like boobs were happening and like boys were interesting and things were exciting. And, you know, YPS just didn't have the sustainability that we thought it would. And so when I saw the for sale sign go up, even though I hadn't been really on his trail for a while, I was like 11, I immediately was like, oh my gosh, my mom is gonna wanna go to this open house. Because Zillow wasn't around then, so if you wanted to see what your neighbors' like houses looked like, you actually had to go to the open house. And so I asked my mom, I go, Mom, are you gonna go to that open house? And she's like, yeah, I was thinking about it. And I go, Mom, may I please go with you? I wanted to see what his house looked like so badly. And she was like, I don't know, are you gonna be weird? And I was like, no, I'll be on my best behavior, just please may I come with you? She's like, fine, that's fine, just, you know, don't be weird. And I was like, okay. And so we walked in, I remember I was like so nervous, and then we opened the door, we go into this open house, and his house was so incredibly plain and boring. And I thought about it now, I'm like, maybe it was staged. Maybe that's why it looked so, but it was so unremarkable. Like, the most generic looking rugs. And I just remember being like, RV6 lives here? Here? Right? And it was really disappointing. Like I think that was the first time in my life I can clock being disillusioned, you know, like truly. We didn't stay very long, and then we returned and walked home, and my mother asked me, she's like, so, you know, was everything you thought it would be? And I was like, no, it was okay. And I was thinking about this story because, I mean, really, this is just the bare bones of RV6 and YPS, we're going to be honest. I was thinking about the story and what I was going to tell you, and I was thinking about that, and I was like, God, I had a great childhood. Like, that was a fantastic way to grow up. But I do wish that when I asked my mom, she would have said no.